The room was busy, loud, and full of people who had come to enjoy their evening. Conversations blended together with the sound of glasses clinking and soft music playing in the background. People moved from table to table, greeting friends, laughing, and sharing stories. It was the kind of gathering where everyone wanted to be seen, where appearances mattered and confidence often filled the air. Near the center of the room stood a woman dressed in an elegant black dress. She looked calm and composed, the kind of person who didn't need to raise her voice to be noticed. Her posture was relaxed, and her expression carried a quiet confidence. She wasn't trying to attract attention, yet people occasionally glanced in her direction, sensing something about her presence that stood out. Across the room, another woman was making her way through the crowd. Her steps were quick and sharp, the kind that suggested she was already irritated before reaching her destination. Her face showed tension, and the way she pushed past a few people made it clear that patience was not her strength that night. Some guests noticed the movement and briefly turned their heads. At first, it seemed like nothing more than someone in a hurry. Events like this always had moments of small conflicts or misunderstandings. Most people expected it to pass without much notice. The woman in the black dress continued speaking quietly with someone beside her. She appeared completely unaware that someone was approaching with growing anger. Her attention stayed on the conversation, her voice calm and steady. Then the other woman stopped right in front of her. The sudden interruption caught a few nearby guests off guard. Conversation slowed as people sensed tension forming between the two. The air shifted in that subtle way it does when something uncomfortable is about to happen. For a brief moment, the two women looked at each other. The woman who had rushed across the room carried a sharp expression, her eyes narrowed as if she had already made up her mind about something. The woman in the black dress looked confused, surprised by the sudden confrontation, but still calm. A few nearby guests leaned slightly closer, curious about what was happening. Someone whispered to a friend. Another person quietly stepped aside to get a better view. The angry woman spoke first, her voice loud enough for several people to hear. Her tone carried accusation and disrespect. Some words were sharp, the kind that instantly made people uncomfortable. The woman in the black dress didn't respond right away. She seemed to be trying to understand what the problem was. For a second, it looked like the situation might stay verbal. Then it happened. The woman lifted her hand and struck the other woman across the face. The sound of the slap cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Conversation stopped immediately. The music continued playing in the background, but it suddenly felt distant compared to the shock spreading through the crowd. Several people froze where they stood. A glass nearly slipped from someone's hand. Another guest covered their mouth in disbelief. Phones that had been casually held for photos now pointed toward the scene, capturing the moment no one expected to witness. The woman who had been slapped moved slightly from the force, her head turning to the side. For a moment, she said nothing. She didn't shout or react with anger. She simply stood there, absorbing what had just happened in front of dozens of people. The silence around them grew heavy. Guests exchanged looks, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. Some people whispered, trying to piece together what could have caused such a sudden act of aggression. Others stared at the woman who had thrown the slap, surprised by how confident she still seemed after doing it. Meanwhile, the woman in the black dress slowly turned her face back forward. Her expression remained controlled, though the tension in the room made every small movement feel important. People began murmuring to each other. A few recognized her, but most of the crowd still had no idea who she was. To them, she looked like a quiet guest who had just been publicly humiliated without warning. The woman who delivered the slap stood there as if she believed she had just proven a point. Her posture was firm, her chin slightly raised, almost daring anyone to question her actions. Around them, the crowd remained frozen between shock and curiosity, sensing that the moment they had just witnessed was only the beginning of something much bigger unfolding right in front of them. For a moment after the slap, the entire room seemed to freeze. The loud buzz of conversations that filled the hall just seconds earlier faded into an uneasy silence. People who had been laughing moments ago suddenly stopped mid-sentence. A few guests slowly turned their heads toward the center of the room, trying to confirm what they had just seen. The sound of the slap still lingered in the air. Several people stared with wide eyes, their expressions caught between disbelief and curiosity. Someone near the back whispered, asking if that really just happened. Another guest leaned closer to their friend, quietly repeating what they had seen. The woman who had been slapped stood still for a brief moment. Her head had turned slightly from the impact, but she quickly straightened herself. Her posture remained steady, almost calm, which only made the moment more surprising to those watching. Many expected shouting or an immediate reaction, but it didn't come. Instead, there was only silence. The woman who had delivered the slap stood firm in front of her. Her shoulders were stiff, and her face carried a look of defiance. She seemed convinced that she had done nothing wrong. Her chin lifted slightly, as if she expected the crowd to agree with her. A man standing nearby quietly stepped back, creating more space between himself and the scene. A few others followed, forming a small circle of distance around the two women without saying a word. Phones slowly began to rise. At first, only one or two people lifted their devices. Then another. Soon several guests were quietly recording, their screens glowing faintly in the dim light of the room. No one wanted to interrupt, but many didn't want to miss what might happen next. A couple standing close to the scene exchanged confused looks. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "I think she just slapped her," the other replied softly. Across the room, a group of guests who hadn't seen the moment started asking questions. The whispers spread quickly. "What happened? Why did she slap her? Who is that woman?" Speculation moved through the crowd like a quiet wave. Some assumed it must have been a personal argument. Others guessed it might be some kind of misunderstanding. A few simply watched with curiosity, waiting for someone to explain. The woman who had been slapped slowly lifted her hand and touched her cheek. The movement was small but noticeable. Her expression remained controlled, though the room was filled with eyes watching her every reaction. That calm response surprised people. Most expected anger. Most expected shouting. But instead, she stood there quietly, breathing slowly, as if she was choosing her next move carefully. The woman who had slapped her shifted her weight slightly, glancing around at the growing crowd. For the first time, it seemed like she noticed just how many people were watching. Still, she didn't step back. Instead, she crossed her arms, her posture showing confidence, almost as if she believed she had just defended herself against something. A waiter carrying a tray paused several steps away, unsure whether to continue walking or turn around. The tension in the air was so thick that even staff members hesitated to move too close. The music continued playing through the speakers, but now it felt strangely out of place. Soft laughter from another part of the venue faded as more people became aware that something serious had just happened. Guests from nearby tables slowly stood, trying to see past others' shoulders. A tall man near the front leaned slightly to the side, whispering to someone next to him. "This is about to turn into a big problem," he murmured. Another guest nodded quietly. The woman in the black dress finally lifted her eyes and looked directly at the woman who had slapped her. Her expression remained composed, though the silence surrounding them made the moment feel heavier. People held their breath, waiting. No one stepped in yet. No security guard had reached them. No host had interrupted. It was just the two women standing face to face in the center of a silent crowd, surrounded by dozens of witnesses who sensed that whatever happened next would change the entire atmosphere of the night. A few people began whispering something new. Some of them were starting to recognize the woman who had been slapped. At first, it was only quiet murmurs between a few guests. Then the whispers slowly began spreading through the room as more eyes focused on her face, and a few expressions shifted from curiosity to sudden realization. The whispers started quietly, almost too soft to notice at first. A woman standing near the back leaned closer to her friend and spoke under her breath. Her eyes stayed fixed on the woman in the black dress. "I think I know who she is," she said. Her friend frowned slightly, trying to look again through the crowd. At first, the face didn't immediately trigger recognition, but the more people stared, the more familiar she began to seem. Another guest, a man holding a glass of sparkling water, slowly lowered his drink. His eyes narrowed as he looked more carefully at the woman who had just been slapped. "Wait," he murmured to the person beside him. "Isn't that?" He didn't finish the sentence, but the thought had already started spreading. The woman in the black dress stood quietly, her posture still calm despite the attention growing around her. Her composure didn't match the chaos building in the room. Instead of reacting emotionally, she simply stood with a quiet confidence that made some guests look at her with even more curiosity. A few steps away, two younger guests began searching their phones. "I swear I've seen her somewhere," one of them said. "Maybe online or in the news." They quickly opened social media pages and searched for images, comparing them to the woman standing in the center of the room. Meanwhile, the woman who had thrown the slap still looked convinced that she had the upper hand. She crossed her arms and shifted her weight, glancing around at the growing audience as if daring someone to challenge her actions. But the atmosphere around her was slowly changing. The whispers were no longer just about the slap. They were about the identity of the woman she had just struck. Near the front of the crowd, an older man suddenly straightened his posture. His eyes widened slightly as recognition settled in. "Oh no," he muttered. The woman standing next to him noticed his reaction immediately. "What?" she asked. He legged closer, lowering his voice even more. "That's her," he said quietly. "That's Marcus Ellington's wife." The name landed heavily. The woman beside him blinked in surprise. "Are you serious?" He nodded slowly, his expression tense now. Across the room, the same realization began spreading among other guests. Someone else had recognized her too. A few people exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. Marcus Ellington wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. His business empire stretched across industries, from technology to real estate. His name appeared in financial headlines, business magazines, and charity galas. People spoke about his success with a mix of admiration and caution. And the woman standing quietly in the center of the room was his wife. She was known for keeping a relatively low public profile. While her husband appeared frequently in interviews and business events, she preferred to stay out of constant media attention. Still, those who followed high-profile circles recognized her elegance and calm presence whenever she attended major gatherings. Now several guests began looking at her again, this time with completely different expressions. Some were shocked. Others looked uneasy. One guest whispered to another, "Does she know who she just slapped?" The question moved quickly through the crowd. Phones that had been recording moments earlier now captured something much more serious. The context of the moment had suddenly changed, and people realized they might be witnessing a situation far bigger than a simple argument. The woman who had delivered the slap still didn't seem to understand. She noticed the whispers and the shifting reactions, but misread them as support or curiosity. Her posture remained proud, her expression stubborn. Meanwhile, the woman in the black dress remained quiet. Her hand had dropped from her cheek, and she stood with the same composed posture she had maintained since the moment it happened. Her calm presence only added to the tension building around her. A few people in the crowd began glancing toward the entrance of the hall. Some of them knew that Marcus Ellington had been invited to the same event. Others wondered if he was already somewhere inside the building. A nervous murmur moved through a small group near the side of the room. "If he's here," someone whispered. Another person shook their head slowly. "This is about to get serious." Across the floor, more guests stepped slightly backward, creating even more space around the two women. The circle of distance grew wider as people realized they were standing in the middle of something that could turn into a major scene at any moment. Several guests exchanged worried looks. Because if the whispers were true, the woman who had thrown that slap had just publicly humiliated the wife of one of the most powerful men in the room. And the realization was only beginning to reach her. The tension in the room continued to grow as whispers moved from one corner to another. Guests who had been chatting moments ago were now focused on only one thing. All eyes stayed on the woman in the black dress and the woman standing defiantly in front of her. A few people near the entrance suddenly turned their heads. Someone had just walked into the hall. At first, only a small group noticed him. But the reaction spread quickly as more guests looked toward the door. Conversations stopped again, replaced by quiet murmurs moving through the crowd like a ripple. Marcus Ellington had arrived. He walked in with the steady confidence people expected from him. Tall, composed, and sharply dressed, he carried the calm authority of someone used to commanding attention without raising his voice. A couple of guests near the entrance greeted him politely, but their smiles faded as they noticed the unusual silence filling the room. Marcus paused slightly. He sensed immediately that something was wrong. The atmosphere didn't feel like a normal social gathering anymore. Instead of laughter and conversation, there was tension. People were standing in clusters, some holding their phones, others whispering with concerned expressions. His eyes moved slowly across the room, trying to understand what had caused the sudden shift in energy. Then he noticed the crowd gathered in the center. Several guests quietly stepped aside as he began walking toward them. No one said anything directly, but their body language showed that something serious had just happened. As Marcus moved closer, the path in front of him slowly opened. People stepped out of the way almost instinctively. The murmurs grew louder as more guests realized where he was heading. Some looked nervous. Others looked curious. A few people lowered their phones slightly, realizing the situation had just become far more important. Marcus finally reached the edge of the circle, and then he saw her. His wife stood in the center of the room, calm but surrounded by tension. Her posture remained straight, her expression controlled. Even from a few steps away, he could see the faint mark forming on her cheek. His eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't rush forward or raise his voice. Instead, he walked the remaining steps slowly until he stood beside her. The crowd grew even quieter. The woman who had thrown the slap suddenly looked at him. At first, her expression showed confusion, as if she didn't immediately recognize who he was. But as people around her reacted, the realization began to reach her. Marcus Ellington was standing right in front of her. The billionaire looked briefly at his wife, studying her face. His voice was calm when he finally spoke. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded once. The exchange was quiet, but in the silent room it felt powerful. Guests leaned slightly closer, trying not to miss a single word. Marcus turned his attention toward the other woman. For a moment, he said nothing. His gaze was steady, firm, and impossible to ignore. The kind of look that made people suddenly aware of the weight of their actions. The woman who had slapped his wife shifted slightly under that stare. The confidence she had shown earlier began to fade. Her arms slowly uncrossed, and her posture changed as the reality of the moment settled in. Marcus spoke again, his voice still controlled. "Did you hit her?" The question hung in the air. No shouting, no anger, just a simple question that carried more pressure than any raised voice could. Several guests exchanged nervous glances. Some of them had seen Marcus in business meetings and interviews before. They knew his reputation for staying calm under pressure, but they also knew he didn't tolerate disrespect, especially when it came to his family. The woman hesitated. Her earlier confidence seemed to disappear as dozens of eyes remained fixed on her. The phone still recording made the moment even heavier. She glanced around the room as if searching for support, but the crowd that once seemed curious now looked uncomfortable. No one stepped forward to defend her. Marcus remained still beside his wife, his presence alone commanding the space around them. He didn't need to repeat the question. The silence itself pushed the moment forward. The woman swallowed, realizing the entire situation had suddenly shifted against her. Just minutes earlier, she believed she had been the one in control of the confrontation. Now she stood face to face with one of the most powerful men in the room, surrounded by witnesses who had seen everything happen. The crowd sensed the shift immediately. The balance of power had completely changed, and everyone knew the next words spoken in that circle could determine how the entire night would unfold. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Only minutes earlier, the woman who delivered the slap stood with confidence, convinced she had made her point. Now that confidence was fading quickly. The presence of Marcus Ellington beside his wife shifted the entire balance of the situation. Guests who had once watched with curiosity now looked at the scene with tension and concern. Marcus remained calm, standing quietly beside his wife. His expression was controlled, but the seriousness in his eyes made it clear that he understood exactly what had happened. The woman who had slapped his wife struggled to hold the same posture she had moments earlier. Her shoulders lowered slightly, and her eyes moved nervously between Marcus, the woman she had struck, and the growing crowd around them. The silence in the room felt heavy. Every guest knew they were witnessing a moment that could easily escalate. Marcus didn't raise his voice. Instead, he looked directly at the woman again. "You struck my wife in front of everyone here," he said evenly. His voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet room it carried clearly. Several guests shifted uncomfortably as the words settled over the crowd. The woman opened her mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out at first. Her earlier anger had been replaced with hesitation. A few people standing nearby quietly lowered their phones, realizing this moment had become much more serious than a viral clip. Marcus continued speaking calmly. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" The question hung in the air. The woman glanced around the room again, but this time she didn't see curious faces or supportive expressions. Instead, she saw people avoiding eye contact, whispering quietly, or simply watching with tense silence. Some guests even stepped a little farther away from her. The social distance forming around her was impossible to ignore. Security staff who had been stationed near the entrance finally began moving toward the group. They didn't rush in, but their presence alone added another layer of pressure. One of them spoke quietly into a radio. The woman noticed them approaching, and her expression changed again. Her breathing seemed quicker now. Moments earlier she had believed she was standing up for herself or proving something. Now it felt like the entire room had turned against her. Marcus glanced briefly at the security team but didn't gesture for them to step in yet. Instead, he focused his attention back on the woman. "You didn't just insult her," he said calmly. "You assaulted her." The word landed hard. Several guests exchanged glances. The seriousness of the situation was now impossible to ignore. What had started as a shocking moment of disrespect was quickly becoming something with real consequences. The woman shook her head slightly. I didn't mean." Her voice sounded far less confident now. Marcus didn't interrupt her, but his steady gaze made it difficult for her to continue speaking. Around them, whispers began spreading again. Some people were discussing what could happen next. Others quietly mentioned the legal implications of what had just occurred. A man standing near the back murmured to his friend, "There are cameras everywhere in this place." Another guest nodded slowly, and half the room recorded it. The woman heard some of those whispers. The reality of the moment started pressing down on her more heavily. Her posture shifted again, and she took a small step backward without even realizing it. Marcus noticed the movement but didn't move toward her. His calm presence seemed to hold the entire space steady. His wife remained beside him, still composed despite everything that had just happened. She hadn't shouted or demanded anything from the crowd. Her quiet strength made the situation even more uncomfortable for the woman who had attacked her. The security guards were now only a few steps away. Guests near the front slowly stepped aside to give them room. One of the guards looked at Marcus respectfully, waiting for a signal before taking action. The woman looked between them all, her confidence now completely gone. Her earlier defiance had turned into visible worry. The realization was finally clear. This was no longer a simple argument in a crowded room. This was a public incident involving powerful people, dozens of witnesses, and cameras that had captured every second. And the consequences were starting to close in around her from every direction. The woman's confidence had completely disappeared. Only a few minutes earlier, she had stood proudly in the center of the room, convinced she was in the right. Now the pressure of the moment surrounded her from every direction. The crowd that once felt like an audience had turned into a wall of silent witnesses. Her eyes moved quickly around the room. Everywhere she looked, people were watching. Some guests whispered quietly to each other. Others kept their phones lowered now, but the knowledge that recordings already existed made the moment feel even heavier. Marcus Ellington still stood beside his wife, calm and steady. His presence alone filled the space with quiet authority. He didn't raise his voice, and he didn't step closer to intimidate her. Yet the seriousness in his expression made it clear that what had happened would not simply disappear. The woman swallowed nervously. Her shoulders lowered further as the weight of the situation settled in. I, I didn't realize, she finally said, her voice shaking slightly. The words sounded weak compared to the confidence she had shown earlier. Marcus looked at her without changing his expression. Didn't realize what? He asked. The question forced her to confront the truth directly. She hesitated before answering, glancing briefly at the woman she had slapped. I didn't know who she was, she admitted. A quiet murmur passed through parts of the crowd. Some guests exchanged looks, clearly unimpressed by the explanation. Marcus responded calmly. That shouldn't matter, he said. His voice stayed steady, but the meaning behind his words carried through the room. The woman lowered her gaze. The point was obvious. No one deserved to be treated that way, no matter who they were. Security guards now stood only a few steps away, waiting patiently, but watching carefully. Their presence reminded everyone that the situation had moved far beyond a simple misunderstanding. The woman's breathing grew heavier. Her hands, which had once been confidently crossed over her chest, now hung awkwardly at her sides. She shifted her weight again, clearly uncomfortable under the attention of so many witnesses. I made a mistake, she said quickly. Her voice sounded more desperate now. Marcus didn't respond immediately. The silence that followed made the room feel even more tense. Guests watched closely, sensing that the moment had reached a turning point. The woman finally looked directly at Marcus's wife. Her face showed a mixture of fear and regret. I'm sorry, she said. The apology came out rushed, almost stumbling over itself. But the words alone didn't seem to release the pressure surrounding her. Marcus's wife stood calmly, her expression composed. She had listened quietly through the entire exchange, never raising her voice or demanding attention. That calm response made the woman even more uneasy. I shouldn't have done that, the woman continued, her voice trembling now. I lost my temper. A few people in the crowd shook their heads quietly. Some guests had clearly lost sympathy for her the moment the slap happened. The woman's desperation continued to grow. I'm really sorry, she repeated, this time more urgently. Her eyes moved between Marcus and his wife, searching for any sign that the situation might calm down. When she saw no immediate reaction, panic began to show on her face. Without fully thinking, she stepped forward slightly. Please, she said, her voice now shaking openly. I didn't mean for this to happen. The room remained silent. No one interrupted. The security guards continued to wait, their attention focused on Marcus. The woman's voice grew more emotional. I'm begging you, she said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The proud posture she had carried earlier was completely gone now. In its place stood someone clearly overwhelmed by the consequences of her actions. Guests who had once watched the confrontation with curiosity were now witnessing something very different. The moment had turned from aggression into regret. Her apology continued, each sentence sounding more desperate than the last. I'll do anything to fix this, she said quickly. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke again. Please forgive me. Her eyes filled with fear as she looked at Marcus and his wife, hoping for any sign that the situation might finally begin to ease.